Hello, everybody. We're going to call to order this meeting for September 26th, 2022. We'll get started, and we're going to take a minute to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We're going to go ahead and start with an open forum. For anybody that wants to come in and have public comment on any of the agenda items, you can step up now. You please address the commissioners and state your name.
I think it's non-agenda.
Oh, so non-agenda,
Yes.
sorry.
Thank you.
Chairman's out. Shannon, are you still there? Can you hear us?
I can. I
Okay,
am
wonderful.
here.
Okay. Nobody wants to come and say anything?
Well, this is not for the agenda, right?
No, it's just an open forum.
We're able to speak to the agenda after.
Yes.
Yes, correct.
All right, next order of matters is the consent agenda. We are going to start with, let me see on here. The approval of minutes. If anybody has had time to read that. All right, if anybody wants to make a motion to approve it.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Is your mic on?
Well, I keep pushing the button, but. Can you hear me?
Yep, there we go.
I just have to get closer, okay.
Okay.
I move to approve the minutes.
I second.
Favor?
Aye.
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 All that's not in favor. All right. Minutes are approved. We are going to go to the next for the regular agenda. I'd like to move a little bit the public hearing for 5D, considering a request for a zone change from A, agricultural, to R4, multifamily for approximately 18 acres, being lots 10A and 12, City Block 50, generally located at the southwest corner of West Austin Street and Pearl Street. This request has been submitted by Z Prepaid Communication Services, LLC, case file ZON 202208. It was postponed from our last meeting, but Shannon is on for a brief moment in time, and so I'd like to go ahead and get started with that one.
All right. So, thank you, Lily. I can get this to, or can everyone hear me? All right, good. Elena Helton, City Planner. As stated, this request was first presented to the Commission on August 22nd, and it was postponed to this meeting. The request is from a zoning designation of ag to zoning designation of R4 multifamily. The property is about 18 acres. And before we get started, staff is going to go over some of the background information about the request, but we do want to take a moment to answer some of the questions that have come up from the public input that we received, from questions from the Commission. So with this presentation, we will take a little bit of time during the presentation to actually help answer some of those questions and hopefully address some of the concerns of both the Commission and the people in attendance. And so we'll still have a public hearing, and people who are present will still have the opportunity to address the Commission and provide their commentary, but we want to make an attempt to try to answer some of those questions that have come up. So we'll take a little bit of time in the beginning to do that. And so, again, the request is from A, ag, to R4 multifamily. And I do want to take a moment just to remind the Commission that this request really is about land use. It's not about a specific development or project or city policy. So the question before the Commission is really about, is this property appropriate for agricultural uses, or is it appropriate for multifamily uses? The city already has established development regulations that address parking, landscaping, including development in the floodplain. Now, not everyone agrees on what we regulate or to the extent that we regulate it. Even city staff, there's a lot of things in our zoning ordinance that we don't like, that we would like to change, including our subdivision ordinance and including the way that we regulate floodplain. But those are policies that have been approved by the City Council, and we can have those discussions and take forward recommendations and changes to the city council. But I would just want to remind the commission that the question before you is really about land use and not about city policy or a specific project. And so we'll do our best to try to steer the commission towards that. And I know it's going to come up because we've had a lot of discussions about development in the floodplain, and we're going to provide some additional options for the commission that weren't in your packet, but came about as part of some discussion and questions that came from the commission. So we think there's a good alternative and a compromise in regards to this request. So we will talk about that in just a minute, but I did want to provide some background information and just remind the commission that the question is the property more appropriate for agricultural land uses or more appropriate for multifamily land uses? Because someone could come in tomorrow and build a school or a church or a pig farm on this property without any additional zoning approvals from the commission. So just want to provide some context. So with that, we're going to talk about some adjacent zoning and land use. For those that weren't in attendance for the previous meeting or maybe not have read through the entire packet. So the adjacent property does include a mix of zoning. So immediately to the east and south, you have R4 multifamily zoning. To the south is a multifamily complex that was built back in the 70s. To the east, the other multifamily zoning is actually more of a mixed-use residential neighborhood. It includes single-family, but it's also developed with duplexes and multifamily structures. So it is more of a medium-density type neighborhood. To the north, across West Austin, that property is zoned ag, and it's undeveloped. And then to the west, you have the railroad tracks, and then across the railroad tracks, you have property that's zoned agricultural, and this property is separated from that, again, by floodplain and the Bonita Creek. And in the staff report, we go into detail about some of the encumbrances of the property, including the floodplain and the Bonita Creek, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But with this slide, we just wanted to highlight that the adjacent neighborhood does have a mix of residential types, including single-family, duplex, and apartments. And this is an older residential development that has just grown and transitioned over time. All right, so this property is encumbered significantly by floodplain and includes Bonita Creek. And so when you look at the map, that heavy or the solid light blue, that's the actual floodway, so that's the waterway of the creek. And then the dash blue and the dash red, those are floodplain. So that's not the actual flood channel or the waterway, but that is area that is flooded during a storm event. And so it is considered all of the floodplain. This comprises about 50% of the property. And so you have 50% that is outside the floodplain and the 50% that is within the floodplain boundaries. And so this is something that's also shown on the future land use map. And so our future land use map shows different categories of districts, but it also shows the FEMA floodplain. And so when we're looking at these requests, that's one of the things that's identified as part of that land use review. So this property is designated as rural, which is because of the floodplain in the creek. And so lots of areas in town that are zoned rural or that are designated as rural in the future land use plan are done so for different purposes. Sometimes areas that are designated as rural are because they don't have access to infrastructure. So it could be lack of access to water, sewer, or streets. You'll see a lot of property on the periphery of the community that's undeveloped as rural because the property or because development hasn't extended out that far, and so we haven't extended water or sewer lines or streets. It also includes property that has physical constraints, such as the floodplain or natural areas. And so it makes sense that this property is designated as rural. This is an image from the actual comprehensive plan. And so you'll see this looks a little bit different from the land use map because our land use map layer includes the aerial background. So it shows you what's on the ground and then overlays that land use layer on top of it. But the future land use plan does show the creeks as the 100-year floodplain. So it is something that's taken into consideration whenever we're reviewing Chapter 4 of the comprehensive plan, which is that land use chapter. So this is an image that's been provided by the applicant, and we wanted to demonstrate what the applicant is proposing to do. Now, I want to just remind the commission, this is a concept plan for discussion purposes only, and so this is a pretty picture, but it means nothing in the framework of staff's recommendation or moving this item forward to the city council, because unless it's a planned development district or a specific use permit, the concept plan isn't approved or adopted as part of that ordinance. And so we can look at this image and talk about it in detail, but it really doesn't mean anything because once the property is zoned, the applicant could sell the property to someone else or develop something different. So this, again, is just for discussion purposes, but we wanted to provide it because the applicant presented it, and we wanted to make sure that it was presented as something that we could use for our discussion. All right. So these are some images that staff went out and took of the property and some of the surrounding area. And so this is actually looking at the property. You can see the zoning sign that we placed along Pearl Street in West Austin. And so it is very undeveloped. There's an existing single-family home that's been vacant for a number of years, but other than that, it is a undeveloped tract of land.
Elena, do you want me to wait till you're done, or should I ask as we go along? Which would you prefer?
I only have a few more slides, so if you don't mind, thank you. So these are just some additional images of the street frontage in this area, including West Austin. These are some character images of some of the existing development pattern in the area. So you see there's some single family, there's some multifamily. These are some additional character photos of some of the residential development that's taken place in the area. Again, this is just moving south along Pearl Street, showing you some of the existing development pattern, and there is a cell tower on the property as well. And so as part of this process, we always send letters to all of the property owners within 200 feet. We also send courtesy notices to all the property owners within 500 feet at the direction of City Council. That was a policy that was established in 2021. And we also place a sign on the property, and we put information on our website and publish notices on social media. And so those are changes that we've made since early 2021. So this image just shows you those properties that are within that 200-foot buffer and the makeup of those properties as far as, are they single family, are they duplex, are they ag, are they apartments, kind of the development pattern of that notification area. And so this is information and a breakdown of the public input that we received for this request, and we included all of that public input in the packet, including input from residents that aren't within that notification area. So people that lived within 200 feet or owned property within 200 feet included 18 separate property owners, and we did receive 2 written letters in opposition to that request. We didn't receive any feedback from property owners within 500 feet, but we received several letters and emails from residents just of Nacogdoches, but aren't necessarily in the notification area. And those concerns were mainly centered around the concern of the impact that the development may have, or that in general development may have on Bonita Creek and that area. And so when we look at the letters and responses, the primary concerns were really traffic, noise, and the intensity of the multifamily zoning for people that were within the buffer area. But outside the buffer area, there were general concerns from the community about the development and its impact on the Bonita Creek and the floodplain. And we did actually receive an email over the weekend, and you received, I think all of you received the email as far as council, and we printed a copy and put it in your place in case you guys wanted to talk about it or ask questions. And so in your packet, you'll find in that section, there's a copy of that email. All right, so the conditions for approval of a zone change request are outlined on your screen, and we went through those in the staff report. And so we won't go through those in detail at this time, but we are ready to answer questions about that after staff concludes our presentation. But one of the things I wanted to specifically talk about were the different actions the Planning and Zoning Commission can take. So when we presented this item in August, we were recommending approval with a condition. And the condition was that there were to be no vertical structures in the FEMA designated floodplain. And we received a lot of input from the commission and from the public. Generally, I think about not only the specific project that was proposed, but the floodplain and the impact of the creek from that development. And so the commission postponed the meeting or postponed the public hearing and asked us to go back and have some additional conversations and think of some ideas in order to provide some measures to protect the floodplain in addition to what was being proposed. So we went back to the applicant, and the applicant actually was working with staff to recommend additional conditions, including no parking or essentially pavement surfaces in the floodplain. However, they were still wanting to have their detention in the floodplain and some recreational trails, and they were willing to dedicate some additional easements in the floodplain for future trails and things of that nature. So they were willing to address the majority of the concerns that were presented by the commission. But then at the direction of our legal counsel, Those conditions could be considered contract zoning, and contract zoning is really a kind of quid pro quo, where the city council is willing to delegate their zoning authority based on promises from a property owner or a developer for certain improvements or changes. And when I talk about conditions, I want to make sure that you understand that conditions can be allowed in zoning change requests, but when we talk about conditions, it's really in the context of addressing an incompatibility issue. So the example that I always like to use is the Heady Leg expansion on Mound Street. So that was a property where it was bound on all sides by existing a mature residential development. They were wanting to expand, but in order to address some of those compatibility issues with adjacent development, initially we were proposing conditions, and the applicant was willing to accept those, and we talked about building height, maintaining existing buildings, but they ended up foregoing that and doing a planned development anyway. But that's a great example of where we were recommending physical conditions that would have addressed those compatibility issues, and I think that would have been acceptable. But in this case, the adjacent development is multifamily, it's zoned multifamily, and the development to the south is actually built in the floodplain. So the conditions being proposed weren't really seeking to achieve an incompatibility issue. It was really seeking to achieve more of an environmental floodplain issue. And so I'm going to let our city attorney talk about that in more detail in just a minute, and the difference, but I did want to highlight that because we talked about it extensively during that meeting, and we included information about it in the staff report. So since then, we had conversations with our city attorney about changing the recommendation to rezone only a portion of the property. And so one of the options that's going to be presented to you this evening, or that we're presenting to you this evening, is instead of rezoning the entirety of the property, the entire 18 acres, the commission could, as part of your recommendation to council, rezone just the portion of the property that is outside the 100-year floodplain. And the reason that that is significant is because whenever we're looking at development and zoning, all of your improvements that you're building to support your development, whether that's parking, your access, even your detention, all has to be zoned for whatever use that is. And so if you're building multifamily, that entire area where you're building and you're moving dirt also has to be zoned multifamily. So by limiting the zone change to just that property that's outside of the 100-year floodplain, you are in essence prohibiting development in the floodplain. Does that make sense? So we wanted to propose that as an option for the council because we think that it meets the intent as far as the commission postponing the meeting and us going back to the drawing board and trying to find solutions for protecting the floodplain, but without the type of conditions that could be considered contract zoning. And so we just wanted to present that. I know there's going to be lots of questions about that. And so the other option is to deny the request. And so we wanted to lay that out for you to know that you have options. It's not a yes or no, but it can be a yes, but. And so the applicant is also in attendance if the commission should have any questions. And with that, I'll conclude staff's presentation and open it up for questions from the commission before we open up the public hearing.
Any questions? Commissioner Conklin?
No, ma'am, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. That was very thorough and appreciate that.
Thank you. And I want to thank staff and the applicant for working to make this something that's a win-win for the community, both by providing good housing and preserving Lanana Creek for future generations. And so thank you for that. I'm a little confused. I have several questions, but I'm a little confused about because the packet doesn't show, I mean, we're not really being presented with the third bullet point there, so I don't know if we need to postpone until that packet is presented.
No, we don't. No, we don't.
I know nobody wants to postpone, and I don't either, but I'm a little uncomfortable not being sure what I'm
Sure.
agreeing to or voting for, so.
Sure. So essentially, if we wanted to make a motion for that and say that we will approve the zoning rechange from agriculture to R4 with a portion of it being restricted for agriculture to remain to the 100-year floodplain. Sorry, Elaine, I'm speaking for you, and I'm not trying to. And then we can take a vote of approval, or we can deny that. And so if that motion carries, that basically is set in record in our minutes.
Yeah, so essentially, the motion would look something like, I recommend approval of the zone change request, limiting the boundaries of R4 to that property outside of the 100-year FEMA designated floodplain as approved by the floodplain administrator, or as shown on the FEMA flood map. So that could be a motion, and then we could get a second discussion that we could take forward just to city council.
Does
I'm
that
gonna
make
pull
you
up the
feel
floodplain map.
comfortable? Or do you have more
Or,
questions?
no, I think that does make me feel comfortable, but I still have some questions
Sure,
and some
sure.
comments, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I just want to make sure you all have a chance, because I tend to
That's okay.
dominate. Okay, so, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the floodplain study that was done in 2010. And I know you're telling me that's not really my job, but I do feel like it's important, and I want to make sure the public is aware of it. So this study, this is the executive summary. It was funded by Texas Water Development Board, and they basically said that increased development throughout the city has exacerbated the creek's capacity, causing substantial damage during moderate storm events, and that the city must implement a comprehensive plan to decrease the likelihood of property damage in such a storm event. And then they ran models, and they came up with various options, ranging from do nothing through tunneling the floodwaters through town. Well, some of them aren't really feasible, and they're very expensive, but a couple of them that I thought were worth acknowledging is, first of all, the alternative number 2, at a cost of $23 million, would mean buying out all of the existing structures that are in the floodplain. But they acknowledge that unless development in the floodplain ceases, that wouldn't really make sense. Alternative 3 says to rezone areas inside the 100-year floodplain to floodplain greenbelt. With that kind of zoning, we would qualify for funds and grants to improve that with trails and public use and so on, at an estimated cost of $12 million, and it could be done over 12 years. So, and then number 4 is to adopt stringent regulations to reduce damage from flooding and protect the public, and that would also allow FEMA grants to be used to get some of those properties out of the floodplain. So I just was wondering if, to your knowledge, have any of these options been implemented, or is city staff aware of this study?
Yeah, so our comprehensive plan was adopted in 2003, and that study was published in 2010. So it was published post comprehensive plan, and we haven't updated our plan since then, but we're going through that process now. And so we have shared that study with the consultant team as part of their evaluation, as well as some other studies that are currently being done. And I can let our city engineer speak more to that. But yes, city staff is aware of that. We've shared that with the consultant team as part of their evaluation whenever they're looking through and making recommendations for changes.
But none of the measures except the do-nothing option has really been done, right? Is that correct?
Not to my understanding.
Okay. I wanted to make sure that there wasn't some important items on there that had already been taken care of, so.
And that was the study that was contracted by the Texas Water Development Board for Nacogdoches. It wasn't contracted by Nacogdoches. And so that board does a lot of independent studies. And so I don't know how much participation that the city had or city council had in that study and making those recommendations. So I did just want to highlight that, yeah.
I mean, hopefully they were aware of it, so, anyway.
And Maggie, will you give me a second?
Yeah,
Commissioner Conklin, how long do we have you on here for?
Till the top of the hour.
Top of the hour. Okay. Please keep that in mind whenever we're going through all of it, so we can make.
Okay, I'm gonna speed talk here. I did want to ask you a couple of things about the package. In particular, there's a couple of paragraphs in here saying that the applicant says that they don't intend to utilize the floodplain area. And I think you pointed out that those aren't really binding. So it's, once it's zoned, if the whole thing were zoned to R4, it's pretty much anything goes. So that's good. And then with respect to consistency with the comprehensive plan, I'm a little baffled that there's no mention in here of Chapter 4, which specifically states that the floodplain and the corridor, the stream corridors of Bonita and Lanana are worth protecting. And since half the site is floodplain, and we talked about it publicly in the last meeting, and you and I talked about it, and you had a reason, but I have to admit, I didn't really understand the reason, so I just thought I'd ask you again.
Thank you for your question. So whenever we're reviewing a zone change request, we do review it against its compliance with the comprehensive plan. And really, whenever we're talking about the comprehensive plan in the context of zone change requests, we're talking about Chapter 5, which is the land use chapter. And the purpose of that chapter is to provide a framework for individual land use decisions whenever these types of requests are coming before the commission and city council. And that chapter the land use chapter references the environmental chapter and states that that chapter should be referenced to make sure that the commission is aware of floodplain and property that has or could be sensitive to development based on their encumbrances, which we've done. And so we didn't do that in the comprehensive section, but in the other sections of the staff report, we did talk extensively about the floodplain and the creek and the potential impact of the development to that. And that is located within the land use chapter of the comprehensive plan. And so historically, looking back at some of the requests, or all of the requests that we've taken forward, we've never done analysis of these types of requests in comparison to all of the different chapters of the comprehensive plan, because you could take in a request and pick and choose a reason to support or not support a request. And so we focus on the land use chapter, which does talk about avoiding undesirable outcomes by identifying flood-prone areas and areas that are sensitive to development. And so,
Should be in our packet.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's rural,
mm-hmm.
but then you say it's rural, which is floodplain, so you do acknowledge that it's floodplain, but, so you're saying that you only look at Chapter 6?
Typically, yes.
To see if this is
Because-
consistent with the comprehensive plan?
Yes, ma'am, because Chapter 6 outlines those additional goals and objectives that reference avoiding undesirable outcomes, building neighborhoods, economic development, growth inward. And so those are the criteria that are typically used whenever we're evaluating the request against the comprehensive plan. And again, that chapter references other chapters, and we will talk about housing in neighborhoods, because that's also in the land use plan. So there's a lot of crossover when we're looking at these different chapters, but we don't do a chapter-by-chapter analysis of for every request. I hope that answers your question.
Well, wait, you said for every request.
Yes.
But this request is a property that includes 50% floodplain, so it seems like it would be relevant for this request.
Yes, and so that rural designation is because of that floodplain-prone area, and we talk extensively about that in the staff report. And so we did reference that chapter, and we talked about it throughout. Now, we didn't include it in that comprehensive plan section because really it's the land use that we're talking about, because we have development regulations in place for floodplain mitigation. And so I understand that there's probably some disagreement about that, and we respect that, absolutely. But, the way that we've taken forward these requests is really just looking at the land use, which talks about protecting natural areas, which talks about
Which are the 6
encouraging compact
criteria.
development,
Yeah.
which talks about several of those other things within that chapter. And so that's why we didn't specifically reference Chapter 4.
Maggie, I'd like to say something. Just really quickly, these are the requirements that we have always looked at throughout our packet. We did discuss at length about FEMA regulations, the floodplains, what we were allowed to build on, what they weren't allowed to build on, and vertical structures not having vertical structures within that area. So it wasn't specifically mentioned, yes, in this packet, but we did talk about it, and for future, we can include that later on, and you bring up a good point so that we can actually talk about this as more and more development happens within floodplains. Is that okay?
I think that's great.
Okay, thank you. All right. All right, moving on. Do you have another question?
I'm wondering if you have a recommendation. This last package did not include a recommendation. What is staff's recommendation?
So our recommendation would be to approve the request with the condition that only the portion of the property outside of the 100-year floodplain be changed to R4 multifamily, and the rest remain ag.
So the third bullet point.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maggie.
For now.
All right,
Anybody else with questions for Elena? Okay,
all right.
thank you. Steve, did you want to say anything? Oh, sorry, Commissioner
No,
Conklin?
just real quick, Elena, did you discuss, I guess, did the city talk to the developer or the owner about that change?
This was a change that was made just within the last couple of days, so we haven't quite yet. We did talk to the developer extensively about conditions in the floodplain, prohibiting development in the floodplain, alternatives for planned development, but this particular condition, we have not proposed to the applicant yet, because we wanted really to get the feedback from the commission and see if it was something that was amenable to the public and the commission. So
Thank you.
so I would advise to have the applicant come forward and talk to the commission about that, to make sure that they're also in support of that.
Thank you. All right, Elena, did Steve need to say anything? Mr. Kirkland?
No.
Okay, perfect. We'll open it up for public comment on this agenda. Would anybody like to step forward? Okay, please keep in mind that Commissioner Conklin has to vote on this, and he's only here till the top of the hour.
Once you have the applicant first.
Oh, applicant, I'm sorry.
Okay, you said open it.
Sorry,
to the
I'm so
public.
sorry. Going back,
So,
I'm gonna have the
I'm
applicant
ready.
speak. Sorry, Pat.
Because you've got a time frame.
I do.
I don't
All
have
right.
a tissue. Where are the tissues?
You're doing great, Lily.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, of course. Would the applicant like to come and speak? Please state your name.
Hi, my name is Ali Makani. I live in Plano, Texas.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I know you have some concern about the flood side and everything. I understand that. We already made the new site plan, which I already sent it to Alina, which it shows we reduced the building sizes. Used to be 12, now we reduced it to 10 to go out of flood plan, and I'm gonna support that. That's fine. I don't need to build anything on the floodplain area. So we're gonna be okay with it, so.
Great, perfect.
And you can do like agriculture half and half leave to the zoning, that way, you guys all in the one page and we don't have any problem in it. Future, maybe if you want to put the trail there or something, the city wants to do anything, I can willing to give them an easement, I have no problem on that.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Does anybody have any, oh, I'm sorry, are you finished?
No. that's
Okay.
it.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for him, commissioners?
I do
Just,
not, but thank you.
Commissioner Fu, this is Shannon. I apologize, but I can't, it was hard to hear. Is the applicant stating that he's in support of the most recent recommendation by the city?
Correct, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. All righty. You may have a seat. Thank you. All right, it's open now for public comment. Please state your name and please be aware that you have 3 minutes.
I need
To
go
speak.
fast, and I may need more than 3 minutes, and I appreciate that.
Pat,
we
I might have to cut you off at 3 minutes.
Well, I'll talk as fast as I can.
All right.
Will you kindly pass these out? to
Absolutely.
everyone? And please do not use this for my 3 minutes, because I haven't started talking yet. Okay, my first question is, why are we voting on something that the public hasn't even been informed about?
Pat,
That's
can you
number
put the microphone down and then say your
Pat
name?
Costello,
Okay.
1009 Logansport. My first question is, why are we being asked to vote on something that hasn't been presented to the public? The public hasn't been told about this. Okay, zoning runs with the land. Once the developers receive the zoning change, they can resell the property at a profit should the plan not materialize. How is this prevented? Overview. There is no information presented for single-family, just multifamily. Floodplain zoning. Commissioner Forbes is an expert in this field and should be consulted in her professional capacity about this matter. Our city engineer should defer to it. Comprehensive plan, compatibility fails. What is proof that property value is not impaired? TA, who pays for this? Bonita Creek, it's an environmental disaster. Orderly growth and development, no information to establish this. Supporting facilities, who will pay for this? Drives and parking, no solid information. Nuisance, lighting landscape. Comprehensive plan, city has allocated $400,000 for a new comprehensive plan. Even so, this does not meet the comprehensive plan requirements of 2003. Take note of amendment request by owner of property. Floodplain should not be touched. Thoroughfare plan, who pays for this? Land use policies and goals. The applicant's own statistics, as shown on page 7 of their brochure, make it clear that the city of Nacogdoches needs more affordable city housing for residents of the city. And they bring in, and you probably know this, what the average is in this city. So we're talking about housing that would be 150,000 and below. We do not need more multifamily. Of the 18 notices sent, 10 of the owners don't live in the area, some not even in the state. I'm not sure about the attorney's position between contract and conditional, but I leave that to the attorney. The plan presented by developers. Page 2, investment opportunity. How
Okay.
much money has been raised, and is this a secure deal? Page 3, not a need for multifamily. Page 5, many multifamily available. 6, disregard for environmental laws of the state. 7 and 8, developers' own statistics show the city of Nacogdoches is in desperate need for owner-occupied affordable family housing. This is not a valid opportunity for our city and has not been thoroughly studied or presented by the developers to the city.
Thank
or the
you.
city.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank
You
you,
are
thank you.
welcome. I've talked very fast.
Yes, you did.
Great job. Appreciate it. Would anybody else like to come speak? All right, please step up. All right, please state your name.
Okay, my name is Susie Lauer, and I've lived in Nacogdoches since, 1965. And I have served on many boards, including the Historic Preservation Board. I've been on Keep Nacogdoches Beautiful. I've been on Main Street. I've been on Convention Visitors Board, so I know what position you're in. I also know Larissa Philpott, and I've worked with her. I've lived in Nacogdoches since then, and I witnessed the flood of 1975. Ruth, I don't know if you did. Were you here then? Yeah. Well, we had moved to West Main Street, and we lived in the old Middlebrook house, which just overlooked the creek. We were like a football field away from that creek, And I remember we were playing bridge with my my in-laws, and it kept raining and kept raining and kept raining. They kept waiting for it to stop so they could go home. It never stopped. So they finally went home. But fortunately, they didn't have to cross the creek. We went down the next day, and I couldn't believe what was happening. It was just amazing, the things that were coming down that creek. You wouldn't believe. I mean, not just garbage cans and plastic bags, but refrigerators and God knows what. A cow came down bawling. A crazy SFA student on a
On a raft.
a float, not realizing you could get clobbered by a big piece of whatever, So it was wild, but it sobered us all up a lot. It hadn't happened in our recent imagination, and partly because so much building had come up along the creek with no restrictions, no floodplain zoning, no nothing. Well, the city responded. They couldn't afford to channelize. We considered that, and at the time, we had just formed our Audubon Society, and we thought we were fighting a fight, but the truth of the matter, it was too expensive to channelize, like many of the options here are way too expensive. So because of that, we got Bonita Creek Park, we got Pecan Park, we got the soccer fields. Now, when I was at Millard's Crossing, the director, I used to think it was important to study history because we learn by our mistakes. But unfortunately, we forget all too soon. And instead, what we do is we go to real estate's highest and best use slogans, which means whatever generates the most income is the highest and best use of property.
30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds. God. Anyway. But we're discovering that watershed and wetlands have great damage prevention value if they're left to do their job. It's hard to quantify in dollars and cents, and we don't know when and how severe future flooding is going to be. So we take a gamble on flooding possibilities and make more incursions on our floodplain as is proposed here. But let me remind you, even though we have a floodplain, floods go outside the floodplain. They don't stay in those borders,
Sure.
And so when you say you're not going to build in the floodplain, that doesn't mean that you're going to not have flooding.
Sure. Time's up. I'm so sorry, but we do understand exactly what you're trying to tell us,
Okay.
and we are very conscientious, and I think Maggie Forbes here is definitely aware, and
Yeah.
talking about this is great.
But-
It really is for the future of our city, so
But
we
I would
appreciate your
I would
comment.
recommend that we deny the proposal.
Thank you. Next up,
I try to talk without coughing. I have construction going on next to me, and it's all dust outside my house
Okay.
for a week. I'm going to elaborate a little bit on what Susie just said. I'm
sure, your name,
Kathy-
please.
I'm sorry, Kathy Redmond, Southwest Ward.
Commissioner Conklin, can you hear? Okay,
Should
I can.
Okay, is that better? Okay, Kathy Redmond, Southwest Ward. On January 31st, 1975, the city of Nacogdoches experienced a 7.5 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, causing Bonita and Lenana Creeks to flood. Most of the rain fell between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m., causing over $5.5 million in damage, and it killed 3 people. That was my first year as a student at SFA. And my roommate and I went down and helped clean the mud in the Coliseum that was up on the walls. The city was very proactive after that about establishing the floodplain. The following year, I was sharing a house on South Pecan with 2 other students, and we received a letter in the mail that we needed to vacate the house because they were taking down the houses in the floodplain. They were either moving them or destroying them. Ours probably got destroyed. It was a student house that was not in great condition. I doubt that it got moved. But the city at that point was very proactive in establishing the floodplain and making sure that nothing would ever happen again. And I don't even know what it would cost if we had a flood like that, because again, it was over $5.5 million in damage, and it killed 3 people. I really hope that this council will consider denying this change that would actually be building in the floodplain. Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you so much. Anybody else like to come and speak?
Thank you. My name is Jim Fleming, and I reside in Austin Hills subdivision, which is just across the railroad tracks from where this development
Yes, sir.
is. I'm against this, number one, just so you know. But the reason is not because of all the things that have been talked about. My main concern is the access to this property off of Austin Street. There is, between Pearl Street stop sign and the guardrail to the bridge, is 450 feet, okay? There is, half of that is a turn lane where you're coming from the, I'm direction turn, west to east, east to west. And that entrance has got to be somewhere in there, okay? Because as you get closer to the bridge, it drops off dramatically. So unless you build that property up, you can't get in there. So the entrance and exit to that property, as it's shown on this map, is going to be right where everybody is trying to turn. And traffic is considerably getting heavier on Austin Street because this would add to it, obviously. But we just have the new senior center that's gone in. And as I was driving here before 5 o'clock, Austin Street was just full of cars. So imagine trying to get in and out of this property where you got 2 lanes trying to turn, one goes straight and one trying to turn. I don't, you know, I'm not against them building this property. This is just not the right location. Unless you can move the entrance and exit out off of Austin Street. I just don't, I don't see where that's even feasible. And my question is, has that been taken into consideration on this? And who does that? We can't just approve this project and say, okay, it's done, and then all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute, they got to get in and out of here, and they got to get in and out off of Austin Street. Then what do? Then it's too late. So you guys better do your homework, because if you don't, it's gonna bite us. So from that standpoint, that's my position.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure?
Of Elena? I know that you said a traffic study will be done. If it turns out that the traffic study says that there's a problem, what happens? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, so the development,
Sir, Elena needs to speak on that because it's text dot.
yeah, so once they submit a permit plan, a traffic impact analysis will be submitted based on the number of units that they're proposing. So anything that exceeds a certain threshold, in this case, it's any additional trips per day, I believe it's 500 additional trips per day, or that would equal essentially 60 multifamily units, would trigger a traffic impact analysis, and that analysis would demonstrate the impact of that additional density onto the adjacent roadways and recommend additional improvements to those roadways to accommodate that impact. And so the applicant would be required to either provide those improvements, or they would be limited in what they could build. So you're looking at either a reduction in the actual number of units based on the impact, or they're gonna have to mitigate that by making some additional improvements to the roadway to accommodate the additional traffic that it generates.
Does the applicant know how many units, if the development is only in the upland area out of the floodplain, how many units would be proposed?
I can let the applicant speak to that, if you like. I know that this is a preliminary concept plan that we've shown you.
Also, Matt has a question for you.
Elena, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you repeat that one more time? Just, I was writing and I missed the detail there. You said that if the study called for improvements, what would happen then?
Yeah, so the permit would be approved on the condition that those off-site traffic improvements are made. Otherwise, we wouldn't permit the plan. And so, there may be a scenario where the applicant doesn't want to make certain improvements. Well, then we're not going to approve your plans. Or you're going to have to reduce the number of units and demonstrate that there's no impact. So there are some things in place to provide some additional assurances that the impact is minimal, or that they'll make changes to accommodate for it.
Okay, thank you, Elena.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, would the applicant like to come up and answer that question, please?
So I just sent a new site plan to the Alina, and it's about 10 building. I don't know if you guys have it in your system, but it's a 10 building. It's gonna be around 80 apartments. total.
Commissioner Conkling, did you hear that? 10 buildings and 80 apartments? Okay, thank you,
That's
sir.
it. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, no, you may be seated. Thank you so much.
This one, right?
We got 10 minutes for Shannon to get off, so. we got- Mhm. Hello, sir.
Evening.
My
Welcome
name's
back.
Jeff Lingle. I live at 1427 West Macklemore Court, and this is disappointing to say the least. The red flags, it's odd that you allow people to speak and you hear, but it's like it doesn't sink in. And if you recall, in the last meeting, the applicant stated no less than 6 times that he's not a good businessman. And yet you guys want to prove this guy, this applicant, in charge of a multi-million-dollar project. He said it 6 times. So for any reason this thing doesn't work out, you guys are on the hook because he told you, and he can be able to say, hey, I told you I'm not a good businessman. So that's why this folded up. That's number one. But then, what's so odd about this whole project is that the default should be, unless people line up in favor of it, you guys should be against it. He should have to line up people from the area. And for you guys to get on this board like you're regular citizens, and then when you get on the board, you presume to tell people what's best for them when you don't even live in the area. Except for Maggie. I could tell from the last meeting,
We all live here, sir.
God bless her, not here close. She's the only one that cares about the environment and cares about this. Some of y'all didn't even open your mouth and ask one single question. It makes me think, why are you even here? If you're gonna sit there and you don't have any questions, and I seen the faces of some of y'all when she said something about possibly, extending this and, oh, no, so that already tells me how you guys are gonna vote. And as far as him having to leave at the top of the hour, that's a him problem. That shouldn't negatively impact the people in here in this meeting to cut this short just so he can vote. That's his fault.
Sir, we keep it all at 3 minutes per person.
No, but I'm talking about him having to leave
Absolutely,
at the
I'm
top of the
trying to
hour.
be.
That's what I'm saying.
I am absolutely trying to be polite to
So,
everybody and
The
courteous.
main thing you guys need to keep in mind is the people lined up to speak are against this. Where's the people lined up to speak in favor of it? They're not here. But it's like if you guys vote in favor of this, this is similar to what the city council tried to do on that CO, and you see how that bit them in the butt. Don't do that. Listen to what these people are saying. They don't want it. And the city of Nacogdoches is not in danger of going bankrupt. So if you deny the request to this zoning change, Nacogdoches is not going to go under. We're not going to go bankrupt. We're making it fine without this. We'll make it fine after. I mean, it almost looks like Elena's trying to pad a resume by
All right, thank you,
presiding
sir.
over something 10 years.
Appreciate that. We will have to move on.
And,
Thank you, sir.
well, just so you know,
Sir, we have to move on.
Elena's speaking faster.
Sir, we
doesn't
have to
make
move
you a
on.
more effective speaker or
Sir,
your
we are trying to be
presentation more
polite to everybody, please. Thank you very much. Would anybody like to speak? Hello. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Ted
Good to
Poole,
see you.
Coastal Real Estate. I'm here representing D.W. Clark Land Investments LLC, the current owner of the property. I am here to speak in favor of this project. In my capacity as a real estate broker, we have several new industries that are looking at Nacogdoches and some planning to expand. We have no housing for these new employees. There's a shortage, both in purchasing and in leasing. Honestly, with these new industries looking at us, I don't think we've got a great chance because we don't have housing for these people. So the thing that we look at, and in the rezoning, there are very few large tracts of land in Nacogdoches that are zoned R4 currently. So we're going to have to rezone something. This particular tract of land was appealing because there's an apartment complex next door. So there's a complementing use already there. So I would just recommend that you do approve this, that for the betterment of the community, for the things that are needed for housing and for growth. It's been over 10 years since we built an apartment complex in Nacogdoches, and that was student housing. This is not affordable housing. This is not HUD housing. This is not student housing. This is just a regular apartment complex. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Poole. Anybody else? Okay, please come up. How are you?
Good, thank you. Vicki Linnell, Cox Street, Southwest Ward. Two really quick questions. Who pays for the traffic study, and why is it not done before the permitting?
Elena, would you like to answer that question?
So the traffic study is submitted by the developer, and the cost of that is the responsibility of the developer. And the reason that we don't require that at the zone change is because today the question that we're looking at is land use. And whenever we get to the permitting, that's when we get to the meat and potatoes about traffic, detention, because right now we don't know exactly what the development will look like. The applicant has submitted a concept plan for discussion purposes, but that doesn't get adopted as part of the plan, so it should have no bearing, really, on your decision when you're making a recommendation forward to council, because it's just a straight zone change. The concept plan doesn't matter. They could build single family instead of multifamily, because single family is allowed under multifamily zoning. And so we're looking at the land use today, not a specific project, which is why traffic impact analysis isn't required until we get to the permitting process.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Commissioner Conklin, you have anything? Okay. Oh,
Could I
we,
have permission to use the rest of her minutes according to Robert's Rules of Order?
whose minutes? Yes, come on up, Pat. You've got maybe 2 minutes on that.
Here's my concern, and is always my concern.
Sure.
Once the zoning is passed,
Mhm.
it's over, because zoning runs with the land. The developer could sell it the next day at a profit because it's R4. I do not understand why we are being given all these different reasons, when in fact, there is tremendous opposition to this. There are environmental problems that are very serious, and it should be denied with prejudice. And there's no other way that you should do this.
Thank you, Pat. All right. Yep, Elena?
Right. Hello?
Hi.
Hi.
I did have one question I wanted to address the public really quickly. Sir, in terms of talking about the environment, I definitely care about the environment. I do understand that there are places and cities that have green belts for protections of waterways, and they have apartment complexes there. I have studied in depth different cities, different types of plannings. I do take my time on the weekends to actually look at water reports and read that all. I do understand that Maggie is an expert in that, and we're so glad to have her here. And we're glad to have future discussions about what this is going to look like for the city. So please rest assured that we are thinking about the public and what is going to be best for them. But in our minds as well, we're thinking about economic development, and that has to be thought about as a city. How are we going to actually generate income for this city so that we can actually do well, so that everybody can win? And we are trying to take account into everything that you guys are saying as well, in opposition and in favor of. So thank you very much for coming and speaking. I did want to also address the parking and the traffic concerns. Steve Bartlett, are you here tonight? Steve, thank you. We have discussed a brief moment about the legends that are on Pearl Street. I wanted you to come and speak and address to the public about the traffic flow, how many apartments are in that complex, and if there have been any traffic accidents on Pearl Street from that.
So I don't know exactly how many units are on there. I think there was something in excess of 500 beds.
Okay.
Because it was more student housing, so that's the kind of numbers that we got.
Right.
Certainly PD could give you a record research of that, but as far as I know, there have been no traffic problems or no accidents of significant. So that doesn't mean there were zero. I'm just saying
Sure.
at this point we haven't done the research. But
Okay.
it's not a known accident area for us or a known traffic problem.
And would you say that that thoroughfare is a lot more narrow in terms of the streets instead of East Austin?
Sure, Austin Street is actually not a city road, and it's not a road that we maintain or operate or
Right.
control. It is a state roadway. It's a state highway. It is literally a state highway. So we're obligated to try to permit what goes there and talk to TxDOT and do the studies like Elena told you about.
Sure.
But it is there for traffic movement.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right.
You're missing the point. It's an intersection you're dealing with, not just a.
Yes, sir, I am aware.
No, you're not.
Okay, Elena?
Yes, are there any other questions of the commission for staff or the city attorney or city engineer?
Okay. No? Would anybody like to make a motion? Commissioner Conklin, are you unmuting yourself to make a motion?
Go ahead, Maggie.
I was just gonna say, Ruth looks like she's.
Okay, okay. We're going to let Commissioner Conklin talk first, and then Commissioner Carroll talk about that afterwards.
I don't have anything right now.
Okay.
What?
Commissioner Carroll, would you like to say something?
I really think that housing is a problem in the city. I think economic development is a problem in the city. I have 4 children and 6 grandchildren. None of them live here, and none of them will live here because there are no adequate jobs for them here. I'd like for that to change. And I don't see it changing if we continue to say to people, no, you can't build, no, you can't develop. Yes, I think the creek is important, and yes, I think that we are trying to do as much as we can do to protect the creek. And if we can do that by keeping building out of the floodplain, will it flood again? Who knows? I mean, we're not in charge of that. Yeah, it probably might, but we don't know that. But all we can do at this point is do the best we can. I think that if we prohibit building directly in the floodplain, which this part of this proposal would do, I don't see any problem with this. Is there gonna be more traffic? Of course. There's always more traffic. Every year, there's more traffic whether we build or not. I'd make a motion that we zone the non-floodplain portion of the property R4 and leave the rest of it rural.
Okay. Elena, can you please specify for us in that motion so that we're very clear?
Very well.
Okay, great. Would anybody like to second?
I would like to second.
Okay. Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. All right, motion carries. We are to approve zoning change from ag to R4 with a portion of it being zoned to agriculture to the 100-year floodplain. Okay, thank you. Moving on. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Agenda item number 5B, subdivision waiver. Presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding a waiver request to the subdivision ordinance section 90-218, minimum lot sizes, and a presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding a final plat for the FM 1638 subdivision. This request has been submitted by Joshua Bush of East Texas. Pat? Thank you very much. We have to conduct this meeting. Sir? Yes, ma'am. Please wait till the meeting's over. Yes, ma'am, I understand, but we have a meeting to conduct. Okay. This request has been submitted by Joshua Bush of East Texas Truck Center. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Commission. It seems that my clicker has disappeared, so we'll just do it manually. So this property is partially inside the city limits and partially outside the city limits in our extraterritorial jurisdiction. Typically, these types of plats that include fewer than 4 lots are considered administrative in nature, so staff approves them. But in this case, the applicant is requesting a reduction in our minimum lot width standards, which does require approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And so that's why you're hearing this item this evening.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so this zoning map highlights the portion of the property that is located inside the city and is Zone B2 General Business, and the portion outside the city doesn't have any color on it, and so you'll see that distinction. And there's also an existing single-family home located on the property. So the purpose of the replat is to separate the property that's located inside the city and zone commercial from the property that's outside the city with the existing single-family home. And so Lot 1 will be almost entirely located inside the city, zone commercial. Lot 2 will be outside the city in order to maintain that residential home. And their access will be from Farm Market Road 1638. And so you'll see the area that's circled in red. That's the proposed lot width, which is 51 feet. I think it's 51.62 feet. The minimum lot width in the extraterritorial jurisdiction is 75 feet. However, this property has been held in this configuration since the 1960s, prior to the city even adopting subdivision regulations. And so this is an existing condition, and the applicant isn't proposing any additional density, essentially just separating non-city from city property. And so again, the specific request is to subdivision ordinance section 90-218, minimum lot sizes. And the specific dimension is for maximum lot width, which is 75 feet in the ETJ. Lot 2 has a proposed lot width of 51 feet, which is deficient by 24 feet, but we find that it is sufficient to support the single-family home that is located on the property. The subdivision ordinance outlines criteria for approval that the Planning and Zoning Commission should consider when reviewing these types of requests, and we've outlined those in the staff report, so I won't go through them now, but staff is available to answer any questions of the commission, and the applicant is also in attendance. This is not a public hearing, but we can allow for public comment at the direction of the chair.
Okay, thank you. Would the applicant, is the applicant here? Oh. Hello again. It's quite all right. Hello, Mr. Poole.
Charles Poole Real Estate, representing East Texas Truck Center, my client. This is truly a hardship issue. Mr. Birch is cutting off a piece of property around a house that existed on the property already. He plans to build a truck center on the remaining part of the property that fronts the loop. Most of this property is outside the city limits, but it's in the ETJ. And so therefore, we're in a quandary because if it was in the city limits, zoning B2, 50 feet would have been enough. We're just outside the city limits in the county, and the county says 75 feet. So the only access to this property that he's conveying the house is off of FM 1638, and it only has 51 feet of frontage. So that's why the request is there. It will remain a single-family residence. A couple's going to live there. They're purchasing the home. The remaining property will be developed at a later date.
Okay.
Is he gonna use that for like his driveway?
Yes, that's his driveway.
I mean,
That's exactly what it is.
What else can you use it for?
Yeah.
well, I know, I mean, how wide does the driveway have to be?
It's a rock driveway, and it takes up most of the 51 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Poole. All right. Any questions for Elena? All right, would anybody like to make a motion?
I would.
Okay, go ahead, Matt.
I motion to approve.
Okay,
I second.
great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is all opposed? All right. Motion carries. All right, next on the agenda, we're going to have 5C, for considering a request for a specific use permit to operate a piercing studio in a B2 General Business District on Lot 16A, Block 67 of the North Heights Addition subdivision located at 3500 North Street, Suite 10. This request has been made by a Primal Piercing and Jewelry, case number SUP 202205.
Thank you, Elena Helton, City Planner. Again, this request is for a specific use permit for a piercing studio in an existing shopping center located at 3500 North Street. The request is to occupy an existing tenant space. It's approximately 1,200 square feet, and the applicant has proposed to limit those hours of operation for the piercing portion of the business from 2 p.m. to 9 p.m. Wednesday through Sunday. The property is zoned B2, and a piercing studio is allowed in the B2 zoning district with approval of a specific use permit, which is why you're hearing this request this evening. The applicant is not proposing any additional construction or improvements. All of the existing parking and utilities will serve the proposed use, and so the only changes will be interior to the structure. There's already a jewelry store located at this location that the applicant is operating, and right now they're doing nose piercings, ear piercings, but the specific use permit is required to do the full body piercing, which is why they're here requesting the specific use permit, and the applicant is in attendance if the commission should have any questions.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you.
Would the applicant like
Yes.
to speak? No need, but you can. Okay. Go ahead and state your name, please.
I'm Grant Menzies. I'm a local business owner. I've lived in Nacogdoches for over 10 years. And so basically we are a jewelry store that's offering piercing. And so, and that's basically it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions for the applicant? Okay.
No? All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience in this.
All right, we didn't receive any written letters in support or in opposition or really any contacts for this request. We did host a neighborhood meeting. We didn't have any attendance, and so I don't think there's anyone here to speak, but we can still hold a public hearing just in case.
Okay. Would anybody like to speak on that? All right.
So again, the request before the commission is to operate a piercing studio at 3500 North Street with the conditions, sorry, I lost my clicker, I keep forgetting. With the conditions being 1,200 square feet and the operating hours between 2 p.m. and 9 p.m. Wednesday through Sunday.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I would.
Okay, go ahead.
I motion to approve.
Anybody like to second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. All right, motion carries for the special use permit for the piercing studio. Okay,
You don't have a clicker, but you're doing great.
you're doing.
Thank you, thank you.
Can't find my clicker or my marker, I start looking like a fool.
All right.
All right, so So the next item is item 6, that's city council decisions on planning and zoning cases. And so at the regular city council meeting on September 20th, they did take action on a specific use permit for a tattoo salon on Justin Street. And so that was approved unanimously with the conditions that the Planning and Zoning Commission took forward for recommendation. They also approved the amendment to the plant shed. That's the specific use permit for the outdoor plant nursery. That's at the corner of Applebee's Sand Road and East Austin Street. And what we wanted to let you know is that they approved it with some additional conditions. So when we heard this in July, there was a recommendation for a 6-month construction timeline. Well, this got deferred or postponed from city council because we had issues with the lack of a quorum, meaning we didn't have enough city council members at the meeting to actually consider the item. So because of the delay, they shortened that to a 4-month maximum timeline for completion of those drainage improvements, with an additional condition that silt fencing be placed on the property within 10 days of approval of the ordinance. And so we're working with the applicant to make sure that they're maintaining that timeline and the conditions that were imposed by city council. So that's just an update on those items.
Wonderful.
And the next item is discussion and possible action on future agenda items. So this is where the commission can inquire about a subject for which notice was not given, a statement of a specific factual information or a recitation of an existing policy, or recommend request a future agenda item be placed before the commission. Now, I know at our last meeting, you wanted to talk about changing the number of meetings, and so we will be bringing that forward. We didn't want to do it at this meeting because we knew we had a number of items and we didn't want the meeting to go too long. So we will be bringing that back at the next one.
Thank you, Elena. I'd like to put on the agenda perhaps talking about zoning for Greenbelt. That would be a great topic for discussion, what we can potentially do, because that would future use of land and protection of our waterways, which I think is vital and crucial with weather changes.
All right, we will do that.
I don't know if this needs to be an agenda item, but what is the process for adding an environmental criteria to the comprehensive plan review portion of the package?
You know, as input, sorry, Elena, you can speak to that.
So that is going to be a change to the zoning ordinance. So it's a text amendment to the zoning ordinance. And so it would be a policy discussion. Do you want to speak to that, Steve? No? Okay. So it's the same process that Lily just did. So we would place an item on the agenda to discuss amending the zoning ordinance to modify the criteria that you guys use whenever you're reviewing these types of requests, including adding criteria for environmental measures.
So I would like to put that on the agenda then.
Okay.
Commissioner, were you asking to add it to the comprehensive plan that's being developed, or were you asking to add it to your review criteria?
To the review criteria.
Okay.
Okay. I didn't know how formal that package structure is, so.
Well, then, in speaking to DTJ Design, that's been very receptive. I've been able to speak to a couple of their designers, and they've been great. And so any type of, just approach them directly, and I have their email if you'd like it.
I would love it.
Okay, all right then.
Probably I've been given it before, but, you know.
It's okay, we can always use it again. We have lots of contacts. All right.
All right.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, wraps up our evening. So.
It's 6:16, we can adjourn.
All right.